This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality. In a world of comfort and infinite abundance, Valentina Briggs was sitting quietly, doing nothing, trying to detach. Her half-closed eyes were focused on a patch of wall where there was nothing to see. She sat there fixedly, kneeling on the floor, her buttocks resting on her upturned feet, hands forming an oval in her lap, thumbs ever so lightly touching, trying her best to think of not thinking. Thoughts were racing through her mind. It felt like her head was full of hamsters, soft, fat, fuzzy little hamsters running in place inside one of those wheels, running and running, then stopping for a moment. Then running and running, then stopping again, then running and running for all they were worth, and then stopping again and looking confused, like the poor little things just could not fathom why they could never seem to get to wherever hamsters were always trying to go. Valentina observed and acknowledged the running in place of the cognitive hamsters without judgment and allowed them to run. She did not attempt to prevent their running or impatiently wait for them to finish running or pray that the one would stop them running or judge them or herself at all. Instead, she concentrated on her breathing. In through one nostril, out through the other, then in through that one and out through the other, and sat there silently staring at nothing and tried again to think of not thinking. The more she tried to think of not thinking, the more aware she became of how the thoughts she was trying to think of not thinking were multiplying within her mind. A lot of these thoughts were not even thoughts. They were more like random furry blobs of meaningless proto-cognitive matter, the only conceivable purpose of which was to make it impossible for her to detach and stare at nothing and think of not thinking. The air conditioning was on some setting designed to simulate frostbite conditions. It had been on this setting for several hours. The tips of her fingers were turning blue. Her hands were numb. Her feet were freezing. Her paraspinal muscles were spasming. Her frontal and maxillary sinuses ached. She could see her breath. Her teeth were chattering. Valentina observed and acknowledged her chattering teeth and throbbing sinuses, the pain in her upper thoracic region, and the cold-induced paresthesia in her fingers, and she stared at the wall, where there was nothing to see, and tried once again to think of not thinking. Everything was happening for a reason beyond our understanding. She, Valentina Constance Briggs, notwithstanding her present circumstances, was still a single grain of sand on the endless beach where time met space, an indestructible, eternal part of the infinite interwoven fabric of the spaceless, timeless oneness of the One. The oneness of the unnameable One. The multiplicitous oneness of the One. The loving, compassionate oneness of the One. Valentina spoke the words, repeating the mantra on her breaths, as she had for most of her 41 years, but they did not produce that peaceful feeling of complete surrender, and she could not detach. She sat there, on the floor, on her knees, her teeth chattering, staring at a wall, sensing that, all right, whatever had happened, however it was that she had ended up here, which she had recently remembered but had once more forgotten, she would never be feeling that peaceful feeling of total surrender ever again. How long had it been since she had felt it? Weeks? Months? She wasn't sure. She had taken it for granted at some point, hadn't she? At some point in her former life? Yes, she had. She remembered that clearly. It had always been there, easily available, inexhaustible, or so it seemed. Nothing changed, and everything changed once you detached. The world didn't change. What happened was, you had lost your perspective, and once you detached, you got it back. If you felt afraid, confused, or sad, or angry, or any other negative feelings, it didn't take those feelings away, but once you'd said your mantra and detached, You saw that they were only feelings, and the feelings had less to do with you somehow, and you were able to acknowledge them and let them go. Because you didn't have to feel those kinds of feelings, those negative, self-destructive feelings, those confusing, frightening, resentful feelings, and if you did, well, that was your choice. Yes, it was all coming back to her now. Again. She seemed to keep losing it and finding it. Everything happened for a reason. Everything always the result of a choice. You learned it as a child, this simple axiom, as you started down the path of responsibility. Later, you saw it bear itself out. The schools you attended, how you did, what you studied, the clothes you wore, who you married, your sexual preference, the corporation for which you worked, the house you lived in, the state of your health, everything always the result of a choice. Everything happened for a reason, and if you couldn't see the reason, that only meant that you couldn't see it, and you probably had some detaching to do. Remove the beam that is in your eye, and the speck in the other's eye disappears. Anger is nothing but projected fear. Freedom grants us the freedom to choose, but not the freedom not to choose. Valentina got up off her knees and stood up and shouted at the video camera that was mounted to the ceiling in the corner of the room. "My fingers are turning blue in here, asshole!" The video camera panned up with her and auto-focused on her new position. The PA beeped. A voice addressed her. "This is Barry. How can I help you?" "You can turn the fucking temperature up. I'm losing sensation in my fucking extremities." Valentina was a healthcare professional, so she knew how to talk to people like Barry. The profanity, however, was unfamiliar. She didn't know why she was talking like that. "Oh my, that doesn't sound good. I'll see if we can't adjust the thermostat. Oh, and your transport is being arranged. Should be just another few minutes." Valentina took a deep breath and clapped and rubbed her hands together. She hopped and sort of danced around the room to try to improve her circulation. The video camera panned and tilted, monitoring her every movement, the little red light on its housing blinking. "Was there anything else at the moment, Miss Briggs?" There wasn't anything else at the moment, so Barry switched off and left her alone to hop and dance around and clap and do this kind of pursed lip breathing thing, all of which, added to the state of her hair, which looked like maybe she had had it styled by someone with tremors who was totally blind, made her resemble a demented person, which, of course, technically, was what she was. She was wearing the standard inpatient ensemble, faux satin, lemon chiffon pajamas, matching grip sole ankle-length socks, and a plastic bracelet around her wrist with her name and a number, which she couldn't get off. She had been in this room for several hours, 7 or 8 at least, she guessed. Her sense was over the course of a night, but the truth was she had no idea. The room was a windowless holding cell, upholstered in pink, indestructible naugahyde. There was some kind of rubbery padding behind it. The video camera and an intercom speaker were mounted out of reach in the corner of the ceiling. Barry had advised her at regular intervals that her transport would be just another few minutes. He sounded like one of those teenage waiters you got at Giggles or the Salad Consortium who were always so happy to be your servers and tell you all about all the awesome specials. Valentina imagined Barry sitting at a console in the nurse's station, watching her dance around and clap, talking, seemingly to no one at all, but in actuality talking to his girlfriend on a Strauss-Chen Industries cranio implant. The SCI 227.8 was probably out of Barry's price range, so Barry would be wearing a 226, which wasn't all that different from the 227s, except for a few superfluous features. Barry was likely still in school. Valentina put him in his mid to late 30s, which meant that he was variant positive, and on some form of pharmacotherapy, probably xenoflaxothoronol H, or one of the earlier versions thereof. Something like 70 to 80% of the variant-positive population was on some version of zanoflexothoronol. The rest were on some other stabilizing agent, lamictotegretol, oxorzenadrine, olanzapropionidone, or one of the others. Barry was definitely on zanoflexothoronol. He spoke in that indefatigably cheery, slightly superior tone of voice, the hallmark of zanoflexothoronol patients. It made you sound not totally obnoxious, but like you were privy to some secret wisdom you wished you could share with the others who weren't, but you knew if you tried they just wouldn't understand. Valentina tried to remember how she had sounded when she had sounded like that. She knew she must have sounded like Barry, and her husband Kyle, and Susan Foster, but she couldn't play it back in her mind now. Her voice, in that supercilious tone. It wasn't as pronounced as that of the Clears, whose condescension was of a whole other order, but it was close, and it was causing her to grind her teeth and to painfully clench her masseter muscles. She hated it now, that tone of voice. When exactly had she come to hate it? Hate. Hatred. That was the word. It must have been, for what she was feeling. She imagined Barry with a sucking chest wound flopping around on the floor like a fish, panicking, trying to cry out for help but not being able to make a sound. The mental image of it made her sick, and yet she couldn't seem to erase it. What kind of monster was she becoming that imagined people with sucking chest wounds? The day before, or whenever it was, before they transferred her into the waiting room, she had lain awake in 4-point restraints and imagined gouging the tips of her fingers deep into Dr. Hesbani's neck, closing her hand around his laryngeal prominence and ripping it clean out of his body. Dr. Hesbani had been kneading her abdomen in different places with his first 2 fingers. He had asked her whether it hurt there, and there, and what about there, and there? Yes, it hurt. There and there. Valentina hurt all over. Dr. Hesbani nodded and smiled like he had just performed a magic trick, which he was waiting for Valentina to acknowledge. He looked like a giant badger or something. Valentina wanted to rip his throat out. This part had happened in the SICU, or what they had told her was the SICU. It didn't feel like an SICU. Then again, she was heavily sedated. She figured she'd been there about a week, or 10 days maybe, or maybe longer. She had woken up out of a dreamless nothing. Dr. Hesbani was hovering over her. "Hello, Miss Briggs. I am Dr. Hesbani." It sounded like he was shouting or singing. Droplets of mustard clung to his whiskers, which grew untended from below his eyes to the top of his fleshy laryngeal prominence. "You are in the surgical intensive care unit. We have managed to stop your internal bleeding. You are experiencing some severe discomfort. We are giving you palliative care for this." Valentina remembered thinking whatever they were giving her wasn't working. She felt like she was trying to defecate something the size and shape of a toaster. She couldn't remember where she was or why she was there or what was happening. She opened her mouth to try to ask, but a pulsating pain that started in her bowels radiated through her entire body and paralyzed her, and she must have passed out. The next time she woke, it was much the same. Excruciating pain, fog of sedation, a few confused thoughts, then unconsciousness. That's the way it went for a while. Exactly how long she could not say. Then, one day, whenever it was, she had woken up, still in the restraints, and the Hadley security consultants were standing there. They were standing on either side of her bed, far enough up toward her head so that she had to turn from side to side to see the face of the one who was speaking. "How are you feeling today, Miss Briggs?" The one on the left, the man, asked her. She rotated her head toward him painfully. "My name is Winston. This is Alicia. We're here to help arrange your transition." Both of the consultants had perfect skin, smiles full of flawless, bright white teeth. The whites of their eyes were utterly bloodless, the irises milky infant blue. "The doctors tell us you're recovering well." Valentina rolled her head to the right. "Which means it's time to start getting you ready." Alicia smiled like a flight attendant who really needs you to return to your seat. Valentina, though no longer in agony, was weak and still rather heavily sedated. She fought to get her mind to focus, but she didn't know what to focus it on. She scanned the room as best she could. She was looking for something. She didn't know what. The SICU room, or whatever it was painted this horrible creamsicle orange, like the color of a 10-minute tan gone wrong. The visitor's chair was stacked with sheets. The shelf on the wall above it was empty, except for a plastic water pitcher. There weren't any flowers or cards or anything. Apparently no one had been to see her. "We've got some release forms we need you to sign. But first let's just confirm your vitals." Winston read out her name, address, her husband's name, her place of employment, her login IDs, and bank account numbers, each of which Valentina confirmed. Winston and Alicia were definitely clears. Both of them were in their mid to late 20s. They looked like A-list fashion models and spoke like human resources people. "Okay, good," Winston said. "Once your doctors have approved your release, you'll be moved to an interim transfer facility. Your ID bracelet is being prepared. You'll receive your bracelet at the transfer facility. Your old ID card and all your other cards have been deactivated and are no longer valid." "The ID bracelet is just for transit," Alicia interjected cheerfully. "You won't have to wear it indefinitely or anything. Your network logins and corresponding passwords," Winston continued, causing Valentina to jerk her head back over to the left again, "have been deactivated and are no longer valid. You'll be issued one mid-sized bag of clothing, hygiene articles, and other personal items. Personal funds in any bank accounts bearing your name and your name alone have been transferred into an escrow account for disposition at a later date. Normally, any such personal funds are used to offset the costs of your transport and housing during the quarantine period. Personal funds in any and all bank accounts bearing both your and your husband's names are heretofore deemed the property of your husband, and no claims or liens shall be set against them." Valentina was turning her head from side to side as fast as she could as Winston and Alicia took turns spitting this verbal boilerplate back and forth at her. She felt like she was going to pass out. Fortunately, just as she started to do that, Alicia stepped up and began undoing the fur-lined plastic safety restraint that was pinning her wrist to the aluminum bed frame, which, for some presumably legal reason, Winston felt he needed to narrate. "Alicia is undoing your right-hand restraint." Valentina nodded gratefully. She smiled. It just seemed like the thing to do. Alicia reached over, took hold of her wrist, lifted it up and out of the restraint, and pushed a plastic inkless pen the size of a toothpick between her fingers. She held out a tablet with a screen at the top and an isolated capture pad at the bottom. The screen was displaying what looked like a contract. The print was way too small to read. "This is just a standard acknowledgement form. You, the patient, hereby acknowledge your non-responsiveness to pharmacotherapy and freely elect to enter quarantine, effective as of your date of transfer. If you would just sign right here, Miss Briggs." Valentina signed the pad. Alicia smiled her clarion smile, warm yet unmistakably superior. Then she clicked the tablet, producing another form that Valentina could not read. "You hereby acknowledge that in your present condition you pose a danger to yourself and others, and hereby agree to remain in quarantine until such time as a medical doctor determines you no longer pose such a danger." Valentina signed. Alicia clicked. "You hereby indemnify and forever release the Hadley Corporation of Menominee, Wisconsin, and all its affiliates, subsidiaries, and assigns, in respect to all claims of damage or injury arising from your treatment and quarantine period. Valentina signed. Alicia clicked.
That was Zone 23, written by CJ Hopkins and read by Brent Robison. This is an excerpt from the novel Zone 23 by CJ Hopkins, Arcade Publishing, 2025.
Hello, CJ. Welcome to the Strange Recital.
Hello. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, hello, and thanks for joining us. By the way, how's the weather in Germany, meteorological or otherwise?
Cold and clammy. I was going to say that it's a beautiful day, and it really is kind of a beautiful day, but just before we came on, we got one of our torrential downpours. It's kind of tropical these days.
Lovely.
Just like here.
We just heard an excerpt from your novel, Zone 23, so can you give us a brief synopsis of the rest of the story?
No, not briefly. It would be. It's such a big, fat, sprawling book. But to give folks a sense, maybe I can just paraphrase from the blurb. Basically, it's a story. It takes place in a peaceful, prosperous, corporate-controlled dystopian future where all forms of nonconformity, dissent, and everything have been pathologized. And the human race is being genetically corrected to establish everlasting peace on Earth. There are two main protagonists. Taylor is a Class 3 antisocial person who lives in Quarantine Zone 23. And Valentina is a variant positive normal from the upscale residential communities. And they both have other plans for their future. It's basically the story of all too human beings who are rebelling against the forces of normality, and the normality is you can gather from the genetic correction that normality is a bit transhumanist, yeah?
Well, that's very nicely put. Now, I understand this is the second edition of this novel. Can you tell us about its history?
Sure. I wrote this way back in 2014, 2015, mostly, I think. Back at that time, I had pretty much finished everything that I wanted to do in the theater, really. I've written a few things for the theater since then, but I had finished the major stuff that I wanted to do in the theater, 3 big plays that had been produced and published and everything. And I just felt like I was looking for a bigger canvas. And I'd self-published this book in 2017. It did really well for a debut novel, especially for a self-published novel. This new edition is published by Arcade Publishing, which is Skyhorse Publishing's literary imprint. And I just want to say I'm really grateful to Tony Lyons and everybody at Skyhorse and Arcade. Tony reached out to me and offered to publish my latest collection of essays, Fear and Loathing in the New Normal Reich. And this new Zone 23 edition just kind of evolved out of that. We were working on the essay book, and it just came up, hey, why don't we do a new edition of Zone 23?
Well, it must be nice to be one of those few examples of a self-published book eventually getting the attention of a big publisher. Not that Skyhorse is actually big. I appreciate their efforts to counter the big five mainstream. So this new edition must feel quite different from those early self-publishing efforts you went through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Skyhorse and Arcade, they're not among the big five, but they're certainly big enough for me.
Yeah.
I published Zone 23 myself because I knew there was absolutely no chance a novel like this, would even be considered by any of the big five publishers or their imprints. Just the length of it, for one thing, for a debut novel, and the content. As I said, there are two protagonists, kind of two narratives, and Taylor's narrative, he being an antisocial person, it gets, pretty wild and woolly, and things like that don't get published these days. My plays were all published by, Bloomsbury, Methuen, and Broadway Play Publishing and what have you, but it works differently with plays. Plays get published after they've had successful productions.
Yeah.
The sensitivity editing mafia doesn't have anything to do with that. They don't control that, but they absolutely do control what gets published by the big five publishers.
Yeah.
Some of the reviews for Zone 23 have pointed towards its absurdist qualities, comparing it to Vonnegut and Pynchon. So, what are your thoughts about how absurdism works in a dystopian fiction context?
I don't think of my fiction as absurdist necessarily. I think of it more as classic satire. Vonnegut and Pynchon are obviously very big influences for me, and also Joseph Heller and Martin Amis, and the classics that are not so comically satirical, like Huxley and Orwell.
Well, I have some thoughts about dystopian fiction that I'd like your reaction to. It's related to a T-shirt I recently saw that said, Orwell's 1984 was not supposed to be an instruction manual. So is it possible that all these warnings about a dark potential future actually create an egregore, a global shared thought form that actually brings the dystopia into existence? It becomes inevitable because we believe in it.
It's a really, really interesting question. I've repeatedly, jokingly apologized to readers for publishing Zone 23, saying pretty much the same thing as the T-shirt. I've said, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't think that they were going to use this as a blueprint, or at least not so soon.
Yeah.
I don't think that writers and artists, I don't think we bring these dystopias or any other type of realities into existence. I was talking about this with somebody just the other day. I think maybe what we do is we tap into forms that are emerging. We tap into them a little bit early, and we paint these pictures of realities that haven't really completely crystallized yet, that haven't taken shape and come into being yet, but realities that people kind of sense already. They sense them coming into being. I think that's more how writers and artists function.
What if there was a deluge of positive visions of the future in books and movies? Do you think it could alter our course?
Yeah, I don't think it could. I mean, again, as I was just saying, I think artists and writers, I think what we are, I think we're part of the evolution of what we all think of as reality. And I'm not talking about, physical material reality. I'm talking about, conceptual reality, which changes and evolves over time. I think that artists and writers, I think we can tap into that process and maybe we can tweak it a little bit. Maybe we can, alter its trajectory slightly. But I think mostly what we're doing is we're capturing or we're giving form to something that is, not yet quite expressible, the next stage of an evolving reality. And I think the process, that evolutionary process, is just so much bigger than we are. I mean, this is assuming that that's what an artist or a writer is doing, trying to tap into that and not reinforcing whatever reality happens to exist.
I have followed your writing somewhat since 2020, and you've been a tireless advocate for free speech, for freedom of choice, truth in media, and you've paid a price for that. So can you give us a quick capsule of your experience with German authorities?
Oh, God, there's another one that's tough to do quickly. Let me see if I can do the short version for you. Short version is I was, as a pretty vocal critic of all of the authoritarian COVID measures back during 2020 to 2022. I put out a couple of tweets here in Germany, and I used the cover art of one of my books. This was my previous essay collection, The Rise of the New Normal Reich. And that shows one of the medical COVID masks. And there's, if you look, squint at it, there's a barely visible swastika right behind the COVID mask. This was an homage to William Shirer's book, his famous book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's one of the famous covers. We stole his cover, my brilliant cover artist, Anthony Freda, and we stole his cover, and we just put a medical mask over the top of the swastika on his cover. The German authorities didn't like that at all. So they had Twitter censor me. Then they had Amazon ban my book in Germany and also in Austria and the Netherlands. And then they prosecuted me in criminal court. I was acquitted, of course, at my first trial. But the German authorities didn't like that either. So they put me on trial again and convicted me the second time. So now my case is at the Bundesverfassungsgericht, which is Germany's Supreme Court. And my lawyer and I are waiting to hear.
Wow.
Well, good luck with that. I understand that your next project is somewhat different from what you've done in the past. Can you tell us about your upcoming American road trip?
Yeah, I'm right in the middle of planning it. And man, is it a big, beautiful monster. What's happening is for 7 weeks, basically, maybe a little bit longer, I'm going to drive. I'm going to come back to the USA. I really have not been in the country except for a couple of days for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
I've lived in Berlin, in Germany for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back, I was back in Miami briefly at the end of my mom's life, but really just taking care of her. And came back and got married, to my wife in the, New Paltz area, 2013. And that was just a few days. Other than that, I really haven't been back for 20 years. So I imagine it's quite different. Anyway, I'm going to come back, and I have rented a ridiculous automobile. And my oldest friend in the world, who's a wonderful photographer and a professor at LaGuardia Community College, we're going to get in that ridiculous automobile. We're going to drive all over the United States, talking to as many people as we can from all walks of life and of all political persuasions. And Hugo's going to take photos of everything along the way. And at the end of it all, our adventures and, people's stories and their perspectives. And Hugo's photos are going to be published as a new book by Arcade Publishing.
Great.
I know you're always writing, but do you have any plans for another entry into the fiction arena?
Absolutely. It's kind of nuts. Zone 23 was always going to be the first of a trilogy of novels in my mind, not sequels. So I'm sorry if anyone has, read the old version of Zone 23. I'm not going to tell you what happened to Valentina. It's, I'm not going to do a sequel. But 3 novels set in the same fictional world during 3 different ages, 3 different epochs. Yeah. I was working on the second novel when all of the COVID madness started. That distracted me. And then came my prosecution, and that distracted me. It's kind of consumed me for the past few years. I had just gone back to the second novel when the idea for this road trip book came about. And it's nice. I got to a pretty solid place with my work on the second book. Once this road trip book is done, I'm going to focus on my fiction almost exclusively. I'm hoping to get the second book done and published before I hit official retirement age.
Good.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thanks for talking with us today, CJ.
Yes, thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure for me too. Thanks so much for having me on.
Speaking of an American road trip, I have to drive to Kingston to go grocery shopping. I think I'll stop for gas and an iced coffee. Should I interview somebody?
I thought you just did. This is The Strange Recital on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was Vibler by XJ5000 from the album Gruber. This is episode 25081.